The night over the Khyber Ridge was a suffocating black void, broken only by the faint static of an emergency transmission whispering across the comms net as Viper Recon's last surviving operator, bleeding, cold, and surrounded by an enemy unit triple their size, sent out an SOS meant not for rescue, but for someone to hear their final moments. Yet none of them, not even their hardened lieutenant, expected the voice that would break through the dark to answer, a calm, controlled female voice that didn't match any call sign in the database. A voice that simply said, "Hold your position, Viper, don't make a sound," before the ridge around them erupted into silent flashes of death as an unknown sniper, unseen and unheard, started erasing threats moving through the night like a ghost made of precision, focus, and fury. And the recon team could only lie there in disbelief as bodies began to fall before they even knew they were being targeted, each shot arriving with impossible timing and angles that suggested not just elite training, but mastery born from something deeper, something carved through battles no one in their unit had ever survived. And as the wind carried the metallic taste of danger, the lieutenant whispered to his men that this wasn't normal support, this wasn't airstrike coverage, this wasn't any sniper they had ever deployed with. This was something else, someone the military never admitted existed. And while the team struggled to keep eyes open through blood, loss, and exhaustion, the unseen woman guided them through the enemy encirclement, her shots always a second ahead of every threat, hitting moving targets in pitch-black darkness as though she could see the future, until the lieutenant, trembling, asked her name, and she only replied, "Names don't matter, survival does." And he swore the temperature dropped when she said it because the voice carried a weight of loss, history, and unstoppable resolve, the kind of tone carried by someone who had outlived every war she entered. And as the recon team crawled through rocks, she directed them with such detail. 2 meters left, there's a tripwire. Stop breathing for 3 seconds. A scout is crossing your line. Tilt your head down now, or you'll catch a ricochet. That they realized with horror that she wasn't seeing through drones or night vision satellites. She was somewhere out there with them, moving through the shadows, stepping past enemies she killed without a sound. And when they finally reached the dry riverbed they believed was clear, a distant flashlight swept across the rocks, signaling more hostile units closing in. But before panic could consume the team, a rain of silent shots dismantled the enemy formation in seconds, each bullet landing with a precision that defied terrain, distance, and darkness until the lieutenant asked her again, almost pleading, "Who are you?" And she replied, "Just someone who doesn't leave soldiers behind." And when they asked why she came for them, she said, "Because someone once came for me," her voice cracking for only a moment before returning to steel as she guided them toward the extraction valley. Though the team soon realized the enemies were no longer hunting them. They were hunting her, whispering in their radios with fear, calling her the Black Mirage, a legend rumored in enemy camps, a female specter who appeared only at night, killing entire units with inhuman precision before disappearing into the hills. And as Viper Recon limped onward, one operator finally caught a glimpse of her silhouette. Tall, steady, a rifle longer than her arm slung across her back, and eyes glowing faintly under the night vision lenses as though reflecting a lifetime of darkness. But before he could speak, she vanished again, moving with a speed that made him question whether she'd ever been there at all. Yet every time a threat appeared, mines, snipers, patrol teams, hidden nests, she eliminated them with a single, suppressed shot that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And by the time the horizon began to fade into the faintest blue of dawn, the recon team reached the extraction point only to find it overrun, helicopters burning, pilots missing, and the lieutenant felt his knees buckle as he whispered, "We're dead." But the unknown sniper said, "No, you're not. Not while I'm still breathing." Before she stepped out of the shadows for the first time, her hood falling just enough to reveal a face scarred not by defeat, but by survival, by battles fought in silence. A face that made the lieutenant freeze because he recognized her. The ghost operator rumored dead 5 years ago when an entire covert battalion was wiped out in an unreported ambush. The only survivor said to have sworn never to fight for any flag again. and yet here she was saving soldiers she didn't know. Soldiers who whispered her legend, but never expected to meet her. And before they could speak, she lifted her rifle and unleashed a display of marksmanship so terrifyingly perfect it felt supernatural as she dismantled the enemy ambush alone. Moving like liquid darkness through the rubble, every shot a whisper of death until the battlefield fell silent, smoke rising behind her like a cloak of shadows. And when the recon team finally stepped toward her to thank her, she simply shook her head and said, "I'm not your hero, I'm your reminder," before pointing at the horizon, where a secondary extraction aircraft appeared, circling downward because she had already signaled them 20 minutes earlier, knowing the team would survive because she willed it. And as the lieutenant tried one last time to ask her real name, she only said, "Tell your people this story on her brave stories. Let them know women like me exist." And then she added with a faint smile, "And tell them to subscribe. And tell me in the comments where they're watching from," before she stepped backward into the rising dawn, vanishing with the same quiet mystery she arrived with, leaving Viper Recon alive, shaken, and forever changed by the night. An unknown female sniper erased every thread in the dark and proved that legends aren't born. They walk among us, unseen, watching, waiting, and protecting those who still believe in courage. And as the aircraft's engines thundered overhead, kicking dust across the shattered valley, the recon team watched in disbelief because even though dawn was rising, the mysterious sniper moved through the thinning shadows as if she were part of them, transitioning from visible to invisible with each shift of wind, and the lieutenant felt an ache in his chest. Not fear, but the profound realization that they had witnessed a level of mastery that no training, no doctrine, no classified program could replicate. A mastery formed by solitude, loss, and an unbreakable will. And while the extraction crew rushed to load the wounded, the medic whispered that their survival bordered on impossible given how close enemy reinforcements were reported. Yet when the lieutenant replayed the night in his mind, he realized she had never once panicked, never once questioned her aim, never once hesitated, as though she had lived that night before in 100 different variations and chosen the one timeline where they lived. And when he climbed into the aircraft and looked back, he caught one final glimpse of her standing on the ridge, hair whipping in the wind, rifle slung low, her silhouette sharp against the brightening horizon. A moment so surreal it felt carved into time itself. And he raised his hand in silent acknowledgement, hoping she would at least return the gesture. But instead she turned away and disappeared behind a curtain of swirling dust, as if the world itself had swallowed her back into the realm of myth. And as the aircraft lifted, the pilots asked what the hell had happened down there because their sensors had picked up nearly 40 bodies, but no friendly marksman signature, no thermal trace, nothing but the recon team's own heat signatures and the chilling realization that whoever protected them moved like a phantom, leaving no footprint behind. And the lieutenant finally spoke, voice low and reverent, telling them that someone had answered their SOS. Someone the enemy feared more than death itself. And his words spread through the aircraft like wildfire, reaching the crew chief, the door gunner, the medic, each reacting with a mixture of awe and disbelief. And while the team received emergency treatment, one operator, barely conscious, whispered that he wanted to meet her again just to say thank you. But another, voice trembling, said that meeting her once was already more than most soldiers got. And meanwhile, on the ground far below, the unknown sniper moved along the mountain's skeleton-like ridges, her pace steady, her breathing calm, her mind drifting through memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit. A burning outpost, a fallen squad, a promise she once made to never let another team die the way hers did. And though the world believed she had disappeared after that tragedy, she had never stopped watching, never stopped listening for desperation in the night, never stopped answering the calls no one else heard. The calls buried under bureaucracy and classified silence. The calls like Viper Recons, which reminded her why she still shouldered a rifle even after swearing she wouldn't, because protecting them felt like finishing a mission that started years ago. And as she moved deeper into the mountains, She paused only once when she spotted a torn piece of fabric snagged on thorns. A patch from Viper Recon dropped during the chaos, and she knelt, brushing her thumb across the emblem before placing it in her pocket with a quiet exhale, carrying it not as a trophy, but as a reminder that her work wasn't finished. Not while wars still created victims and legends. Not while fear still hunted the innocent. Not while nights like this one still existed. And far above in the extraction aircraft, the lieutenant stared at the landscape shrinking beneath them and made a silent vow that he would honor her request, that he would tell the world, loudly, proudly, fearlessly, the story of the woman who saved them, a story he promised would be told on her brave stories, a story he hoped would inspire others to realize that courage has many faces, many names, and sometimes no name at all. And when the aircraft finally reached the forward operating base, the team was rushed into triage as officers demanded a report. But when the lieutenant delivered it, half the room dismissed his words as trauma-induced exaggeration until he produced the bullet casings recovered from the ridge, each marked with a precision-forged insignia known only to black files sealed years ago. Insignia belonging to the elite program believed to have collapsed after the ambush that supposedly killed its last surviving member. The ghost they said was gone. And as the officers exchanged pale glances, the lieutenant realized they feared her existence, not because she was dangerous, but because she represented something uncontrollable, something not bound by command structures or orders, something guided only by her own code. And as night returned to the base, he stepped outside the med bay and looked at the distant mountains, wondering if she was already on another ridge, another rescue, another impossible mission. And while wind whispered across the camp, carrying echoes of distant gunfire, he found himself smiling softly because he knew legends don't fade. They return when the world needs them most. And somewhere in the vast darkness of the frontier, the unknown female sniper tightened the strap of her rifle, listened for the next desperate voice in the static, and walked onward into the night, unseen, unstoppable, and waiting for the next soldier whose life would depend on the silent guardian no one could understand, but everyone would fear once they crossed her path. And as she moved through the jagged teeth of the frontier, her boots silent against the cold stone, the unknown sniper felt the familiar pull of another SOS flickering across distant radio waves. But this time she paused, letting the signal fade, because for the first time in years the weight on her shoulders eased. Not because the world had grown safer, but because she had finally seen proof that her battles weren't fought in vain. That soldiers still believed in courage, that the stories of survival carried more power than the wounds of the past. And as she breathed in the thin morning air, she realized that the chapter she had lived in shadows was finally closing, not with regret, but with the quiet satisfaction that she had kept her promise to those who once fought beside her, those whose names lived only in her memory. And down at the forward operating base, the lieutenant stood under the rising sun, his body aching, but his spirit steadier than it had been in months, because he knew that what he had witnessed wasn't madness nor myth. It was the raw, unfiltered truth of a warrior forged by pain and purpose, a woman who had rejected medals, ranks, and recognition, choosing instead the anonymity of the night so that others could see the daylight. And as he prepared his official report, he deliberately omitted any details that could lead the military back to her, because her power came from her freedom, from belonging to no one, from answering only to her own code. And while officers argued, analysts speculated, and commanders demanded clarity, he sealed the truth behind a single sentence in his log. We were saved by someone who has no name in our system but deserves one in our history. And when he later recorded a message for civilians, the story he had promised to tell, he addressed the camera with sincerity, saying, "This story belongs on her Brave Stories subscribe. Share it forward, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, knowing she might one day hear those words drifting through the world she protected in silence." And somewhere high in the mountains, she stopped for a moment, looking back toward the distant base as if sensing that her legend was already spreading, not out of fame but out of gratitude, out of the truth that her existence mattered. and she allowed herself the faintest smile, a rare moment of warmth for a woman shaped by endless cold. Before placing her hand on the ridge she stood upon, whispering a quiet farewell to the ghost she carried, promising them that she would finally lay them to rest. And then, with a final glance at the world she had spent so long defending from the shadows, she turned and walked deeper into the mountains, her figure growing smaller against the vast horizon until she became nothing more than a shifting silhouette swallowed by morning light, her mission complete, her soul finally at peace. Her legend sealed forever in the night she once ruled, and that was how. The story of the unknown female sniper, the Black Mirage, the silent guardian, the woman who erased every thread in the dark, came to an end, not in blood or fire, but in quiet victory, carrying with her the truth that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who choose to disappear once the world is safe again.